Sir.
You stated that Trump never directed you to lie to Congress. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, you lied to Congress on your own accord and then admitted to lying to Congress, correct?
I've already stated my piece on that. I knew what he wanted me to do. I was staying on party line.
But he never directed you to lie to Congress?
He did not use those words, no.
In your evidence that you provided this committee a mere 2 hours before the hearing started, were payments made to you by Mr. Trump, correct?
Amongst other things, yes.
Yet other than your testimony here today, there is absolutely no proof that those specific payments were for those specific purposes. Is that correct?
It's my testimony that the check that I produced as part of this testimony, the $35,000, and then the second check that's signed by Alan Weisselberg and Don Trump Jr., were two checks out of the 11 that were meant for the reimbursement of the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels.
So in your testimony on page 13, you claim, and I quote, Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being tracked back to him that could negatively impact his campaign. Do you have any proof of this direction?
Just the payment, sir.
So no email?
Mr. Trump doesn't have email.
So no recording?
I do not have recordings, no.
No text message?
Mr. Trump doesn't text message.
So no direction other than your testimony today that that's what the payment was for?
And the fact that I paid on his behalf, at his direction, the money to Keith Davidson's IOLA account. You're right, there's no other documentation I have.
So nothing that you produce as part of your exhibits prove that President Trump directed you in any way to make that payment?
I don't even know how to answer that, sir.
Well, it's pretty simple. There's nothing in the evidence that shows, or the exhibits that you provided today, that show that Trump directed you to make those payments.
Other than the non-disclosure agreement that has been seized by government authorities and is widely shown, I don't believe there's anybody out there that believes that I just decided to pay $130,000 on his behalf.
Well, you were his attorney for over 10 years.
That doesn't mean that I pay $130,000.
Well, it doesn't also mean that he wasn't paying you for representation of counsel.
Okay.
So how did President Trump even know you had a HELOC?
I'm so sorry, sir?
How did President Trump even know you had a HELOC?
Because we discussed it. Because I told him the same thing, that I didn't want my wife to find out about it. And as one additional, Rudy Giuliani himself came out and expressed that Mr. Trump reimbursed me for the money that was spent to pay Stormy Daniels.
And did you tell Chris Como that you had no access to Mr. Trump during October and November of 2016?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to.
Your interview with Chris Como.
I would need to see the document.
Did you also tell Chris Como that you made these payments without telling Mr. Trump because you wanted to protect Mr. Trump?
And I was protecting Mr. Trump.
And you told him that you made these payments without telling him?
When I said that, if that's what I said to Chris Cuomo, yes, that was my line.
And if this unsupported claim was true, then it would be part of an ongoing investigation as evidence of a crime, and the Department of Justice would not let you discuss it during your testimony here today. Is that correct?
I don't know.
Now, we love to talk about this issue about the MS-13 gangs. We love to paint immigrants as criminals. That is not the complete facts. And that is very offensive for me to see continuing to happen, is continuing to message this anti-immigrant agenda. There are lots of good immigrants. And then I hear this rhetoric, more DACA-like people. Guess what? DACA-like people are the people we need in this country. They've served this country, they've gone to college, they produce, and they contribute to the economy. So to put them into the same category is completely offensive. Now, I happen to know about some of these people who come over and seek asylum. Why? Because I represented a family, an unaccompanied minor, when I was an attorney on a pro bono level, and I had to go find his mom, who was also in detention. Now, it is extremely hard to get asylum. It is very hard to get asylum. The standard is very hard, and it's very high. Now, I had unlimited resources at a big law firm. I could hire experts. And even then, I couldn't get asylum. Was it a fraud? No. Did she and they get protections? Yes, under a different category. It took years. But there are people who come to this country because they're fleeing the violence. In my particular case, they already killed one of her sons. Guess what? When one of your children has killed and you have one left, you are going to run. You are going to try to seek safe haven. And so it makes me sick to my stomach to keep hearing over and over again, painting the broad stroke and the picture as though these are folks who are coming here to do harm. And so, you know, it's just unbelievable to me how this rhetoric continues, and to see it continue in a campaign season just gets even worse and worse. And just because you don't get asylum doesn't mean that it's a fraud. And I think that's something that's just so important for me to state. Now, I want to move on to the issue of family separation. According to the New York Times, more than 700 children had to be taken from adults claiming to be their parents since October, including more than 100 children under the age of 4. Secretary Nielsen disputed this figure at a May 15th Senate Homeland hearing. She said that the 700 children figure was an HHS number and not a DHS figure. Does anybody on this panel know what the DHS figure is?
We can, for the record, get back to you with the actual number of people who were in CBP custody and was either unable to determine whether there was a familial relationship that we could prove and were comfortable with, or somebody was prosecuted under the having crossed the border illegally, and then that caused a family separation. We can get back to you and give you the exact number of that.
Okay, and let me tell you, it is hard for some of these families when they're fleeing violence and they're leaving their country. They're not exactly saying, oh, let me go look for documentation so that I can prove this is my child. I had a hard time in my own case having to find people there on the ground to get the documents that we needed to make a case. Right? People are leaving because they're in distress, because they're facing violence, and they're fearful. Right? It's not generally something they're thinking about before they take off. How do I prove this is my child? I'll tell you right now, if I had to go find something to prove my relationship with my mother, it'd probably take me a little while. So I understand how difficult this is. Can you tell me how we are counting and tracking children that are separated from children?
So everybody that's taken into custody, it goes through the sort of a booking procedure, right? We get the biographical information, and so all of that is in the documentation systems at CBP. So that's how we try to establish whether they're related or not using those documents. That all becomes part of their record, because as they come in, that part of that processing is referring them for a removal hearing.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Can I respond to the speech that was made?
Absolutely.
First of all, no one on this panel is anti-immigrant. We're law enforcement officers who enforce the law that you all enacted. So to sit there and say that we're anti-immigrant is just wrong. We are enforcing laws. If you think it's okay to enter this country legally and they shouldn't be arrested, that's just wrong. The laws clearly state enter the country legally is a crime. And no one's up here saying all illegal aliens are criminals. A certain percentage of them are criminals. They commit yet another offense after they're here. I have said many times, I certainly understand the plight of these people, and I feel bad for some of these people. But I have a job to do. I have to enforce law and uphold the oath that I took to enact the laws enacted by you, Congress.
I think to jump for you. I would just make one point. We just had a 5-minute debate where Mr. Cohen disputes what the Southern District of New York found, what the judge found, that he was actually guilty of committing bank fraud. If this statement back here doesn't say it all, Cohen's consciousness of wrongdoing is fleeting, his remorse is minimal, his instinct is to blame others is strong. There's only one wrong with that statement. His remorse is non-existent. He just debated a member of Congress saying, I really didn't do anything wrong with the false bank things that I'm guilty of and going to prison for.
Mr. Jordan, that's not what I said, and you know that that's not what I said. I pled guilty, and I take responsibility for my actions. Shame on you, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman,
not what I said.
Mr. Chairman.
That's not what I said. What I said is I took responsibility, and I take responsibility. What I was doing is explaining to the gentleman that his facts are inaccurate. I take responsibility for my mistakes. All right. I am remorseful, and I am going to prison. I will be away from my wife and family for years. So before you turn around and you cast more dispersion, please understand there are people watching you today that know me a whole lot, but I made mistakes. I own them, and I didn't fight with the Southern District of New York. I didn't put the system through an entire scenario. But what I did do is I pled guilty, and I am going to be, again, going to prison.